Welcome to the episode today. When can I achieve financial independence? And how much should I be investing right now to achieve this goal? What's a realistic balance today between optimizing my own lifestyle objectives versus actually chasing after some financial goals? The answers to these types of questions are arguably way more important than the tools that we often use to invest with. It's a shocker then, in my opinion, just how much attention is given to the questions of which investment asset class is best or what's the lowest cost platform for me to be using. Instead of looking at where we're going, we're often fixated on taking the best possible steps that we can. Creative problem solving and building bespoke investment strategies is what I do for my own clients, and it's what my guest today does also. Royden is a financial advisor, and how I know him is that he is also the co-founder of Planalytics, a financial modeling tool that's helped revolutionize the advice industry here in New Zealand. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Let's get started.
いただきます。
So, financial planner,
Yeah.
CFP, 27 years in the industry. Royden, why don't you give us like the very quick condensed version of your CV? How did you end up in this room with me today?
I kicked myself out of home at the age of 16, lost 10 years of my life, ended up falling into mortgage broking, of all things, before it was even really a thing. This is like 1997.
That's right. You would have been one of the first.
Yeah, absolutely. So quickly realized the people that I was working for at the time were not great people. Right. So left there, but with the ability to do mortgage broking, set up inside a insurance relatively decent insurance practice to do mortgages and be their mortgage arm. We both kind of overestimated how much work there was, but they had tons of insurance work to do. So I ended up doing that, and then fell into investment kind of hilariously. Barry Reed, actually, who was at that point, it was Royal and Sun Alliance. This is pre-Asteron. Right. It had stopped being Norwich. And he said to me, Royden, you're doing all this insurance. Why don't you do a bit of investment, retirement saving off the back of that? Yeah. And I went, well, for the very obvious reason, Barry, is I know nothing about investment. To which his response was, well, I hadn't stopped anybody else. And I'm like, wait, what? I mean, I was just still new at that kind of thing. And I was kind of horrified that are you suggesting that people don't know what they're doing? And he felt silent. But yeah, I quickly realized that actually a lot of it back then, and for a long time, actually after that, a lot of it was commission sales stuff still. Really, I discovered, I wasn't actually surrounded by nearly as many investment people as I thought. And so I then started making a short list of who's cool. And I found Roger Spiller and I found Simon Hassan and Simon sort of then from that conversation found me, and I ended up working at Hassan and Associates for about 6-7 years.
Right. So
I went out on my own in 2007 and briefly started Endeavour Financial Planning before I rebranded in 2011, called it Echelon.
And I know you primarily because of this amazing software platform that I use with all of my clients, Planalytics. And tell me the backstory of that, because I was kind of going down the same path myself, and then I realized actually somebody else has done it so much better than me. Throw this away.
Yeah, and that's not super uncommon. And the thing is, anyone who's a little bit nerd side and does that investment piece kind of goes, hey, I'm talking to my clients about their life. And it's really important to understand who they are, what they're doing, where they're going. Are they going to be okay? And I still say that to this day. I don't care if someone's 27 or 77, rich or poor. Everybody wants to know and understand that one thing, and that's, am I going to be okay?
So how does it work then in terms of helping people realize that? Like, actually, maybe for those that are maybe new to the concept of financial planning to start with, maybe start there, and then how does this Planalytics software help you to do that better?
Okay, so there's a couple of separate things going on there. The first one is lifetime cash flow modeling. So I learned that when I went to work for Simon in 2001, so I've been doing it that long. And of course, everyone's been playing around, kicking around in Excel with their own Excel sheets and that kind of thing. And that's where we were. Yeah. And so I learned that from him. And the concept of lifetime cash flow modeling is simply that concept of you'll track every single year of somebody's life, maybe after their age 100. You don't stop at the expected life expectancy, because actually if you reach that point, there's still a whole bunch of people still alive. So you model out to 100, and you consider all the money coming in, all the money going out, and then what you might be doing with the surplus. So look, I always say I didn't invent lifetime cash flow modeling any more than Xero invented accounting, right? So it's because some people would say, hey, Royden, Planalytics is this thing you made. It's like, hang on. I did. Yeah, it's my expression of it and how you might do it. But at the same time, the maths is actually accepted maths, globally accepted maths on how to do lifetime cash flow modeling. And there is a way to do it. And in fact, one of our advisors who was over in Takapuna, he had known me for years, and finally picked up the software and ran with it. He says, "Hey, you're gonna like this." This is kind of funny. He says, "I've just put in a pretty basic client into our standard stuff, and then modeled it over into Planalytics the same way." He said, "At age 100, and these guys are in their 40s, we are $600 out."
Wow.
And it's like, so either we're both right or we're both wrong. And it's like, yeah, man, there's an accepted way to do this. So arguably, Planalytics is just my expression of it. Now, it's still pretty sophisticated. It does a lot of stuff, but it just really came from being hard out nerd side and then eventually getting it to the point in 2018 where we kind of went, well, let's find some people to help us get it out of Excel and into the cloud. We found some people and they've been amazing.
And it's so helpful. Like you say,
Yeah.
I was bumbling along with spreadsheets that I'd built, trying to express it in my own way, but that's not my specialty whatsoever. And I think it's one thing to say to people, hey, this is what I think you should do. But it's another thing to show people the reasons
Right.
why
Yeah.
I guess from a needs analysis or from an engine point of view, this is how it's working and this is how I've come to that conclusion. Because there is obviously, you're a person, right? And so you've
Yeah,
got your own
absolutely.
discretion, your own intellect, your own intuition, and you know what the right answer is, probably outside of the math.
Yeah.
But you still need to be able to demonstrate that, not just to the regulator, but to the client, because everybody's different. Some people will.
And that's the big one for me, being able to have this piece of software that actually shows somebody their own life in real time in front of them. And once you've done that a few times with them, you let them stay in the software. So that means that they can use it when they're not in front of an advisor. And so what tends to happen with me is that, people will have a wine on a Saturday or Sunday or something, mess around with the software and go, hey, I've been having a play. I just want you to check. So I then become this lovely thing where I'm like a navigator on their financial journey. That's kind of how I see myself. And this is one of the big things with being a financial advisor and a planner, is that, if you can step away from actually that whole concept of product delivery for a second and actually just deal with the person in front of you, deal with the whole person, deal with all their issues, a lot of the value that I provide actually has nothing to do with product necessarily.
So by product, just to define that, what you mean by that?
Insurance, mortgage, advice, guidance,
Investment funds.
investment. Yeah, exactly. Funds under management in whatever way, shape, or form that might look like.
Yeah.
So a lot of the value we actually bring as advisors is actually strategic. And that's not discussed enough, I think, because
100%. Yeah.
because when people are going, hey, do I need to get advice or not? They're always thinking about it with the product in mind. And here's the other thing is that they'll go, actually, I just need some general help and guidance, but I don't know if that's allowed, or I don't know if that's something I should seek out, or who do I talk to about that? Because if you Google general help and guidance, you're not going to get the right results.
No, it's funny though, isn't it? Like, so there's strategy, solution,
Yeah.
product, people, even from a regulatory perspective, from a marketing perspective, what the average punter on the streets
Yeah,
think
100.
that, advisors do.
Yeah.
What people really want is they want answers to their questions and they want someone to help them to see through the clouds. This is
Yes.
where you're actually going. This is where you could go. But what they really get is they get kind of this, and no disrespect for anybody doing this, because I think we all start out like this. We kind of get this, no, I'm not interested in helping you because I can't sell anything to
I
this
can't
person.
figure out how to make money off it.
Yeah, which is understandable because you don't want to pay anything for the advice. So you're going to have to talk to people who are product salesmen, and they're only going to want to talk to you if you're a buyer for their product.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually part of the problem with advisors. And one of the things we're trying to help them get across is actually you're allowed to charge fees. It's okay. In fact, I saw someone a couple of years ago, and it was an initial session. I always charge for an initial session. It's not a teaser of any kind, and I just kind of go blah. And this is what I see in your world. Let's talk about the things you want to look at. Let's talk about some of the things that maybe I'm concerned about when I look at those graphs and I'm wondering how things are going to go for you. And what do we then do from there? And sometimes there's nothing to do afterwards because they're in a place of flux and there's some things have got to play out and whatever it might be. And I didn't see that person again, and she called me a couple of weeks ago and said, hey, do you remember me? I went, remind me. But she was still in the software. So I looked her up and, oh yeah, no, I totally remember who you are now. She says, look, can I come and see you again? And can you charge me again? Because I think actually it was a couple of years ago, and the thing I said to her, because they were looking to pick up a property, and I went, you know what? I think we might be going into a period where we're at a high point in terms of price and value. We might be heading into a downturn. I can absolutely see us going into a period of coming off these historically incredibly low interest rates. I mean, we haven't seen interest rates like that since the 50s or something. That's a multi-decade low. And maybe we don't buy right now. Maybe we give it a bit. We lose nothing by waiting, I think, at this point in time. She said that was super good advice.
Yeah.
And so she says, look, now I think, can we look at it again? I'm going, well, now's a way better time to buy if you're thinking about buying. So we would have another session and talk about that. And I judged her again, and she was super happy and going, right, where do we go from here, kind of thing.
I guess who is going to really, and I'm just, again, speaking from our industry as financial advisors, who's really going to tell people what to do? I was going to say what to think, but no, you shouldn't be telling people what to think. But who's going to really give them advice, which is in their best interest, if the revenue model is tied only to one of a few outcomes?
Yeah.
And I think while that is still understandable, because again, a lot of people don't want to pay for advice, so of course they're only going to get advice that's tilted to one outcome. That's just the way the system works, rightly or wrongly. But when you charge fees, you're actually able to cover the entire spectrum, which is what everybody wants to do. No one really wants to limit what they're saying and self-censor, full stop, but especially professionally. You want to be able to say, hey, this is what I see in your world, like what you say.
Yeah, completely.
And when it comes to property as well, I guess there's always two things going on. There's what's going on in their inside world, what's going on in the outside world. And you touched on that before with actually making a comment around the market. Maybe now is not really the best time to buy. You're not going to say that if your revenue model is attached to selling a mortgage, are you?
Right.
Or selling an investment property, or both.
And yet you still should.
Legally,
that's the thing. I mean, and look, I think there's some, I kind of wonder about some of these places that do make where their revenue model is pretty much entirely selling properties. And so, some of them do a better job than others of saying, hey, we're not here to give you advice. We're here to deliver a thing. So if you ask me, should I buy a property? I'm going to say yes.
That's right.
But others are definitely pitching that they give advice and guidance. So if their answer is still yes, then I don't know, are they considering enough whether it is a good time to buy or whether it's just right for that person? I was talking to a client the other day. She was sold one. Unfortunately, her and her husband didn't come back to me before they made that decision, and we could have done some modeling on it. And looking at it now, there's no way I would have said they should have gone ahead with that, because their main aim was to actually, it was a stepping stone into their own home in a different part of the country. And so now that they need to unwind out of that, they're going to take $100,000 hit. Right. But the advice they were given at the time by the person selling them that was, oh, it's okay, you can just sell it.
It's a tough one, though, isn't it?
Look, that one might go to a PI claim. Who knows?
And I guess it touches on a broader issue that, and you use the same line that I use with people, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And sometimes it is about actually unpacking, can you? And that's when you would look at your numbers, you'd do some initial modeling, and then you'd approach a bank to get pre-approval for finance, and then you buy a home, right? That's the can you question.
Totally.
Should you? Yeah. Who cares about the should you? They've been indoctrinated for so long with the marketing program that it's really hard to kind of do it in the right order, which is inside first, then outside, right? Like strategy first before the tools.
Yeah.
So how often do you have to unwind, like what you were saying before, how often do you kind of have to unwind the actions that people were already intent on making? And how well does that work for you when you're giving people advice like, hey, you shouldn't have done that, or you shouldn't do that?
Yeah, look, I don't mind being a bit forthright with it. And I think I should be. I think that's my job to be.
Totally.
Because, and if you think about it, if you go to someone, you think, hey, look, I think I really want to do this, but I want to check. I don't, if that person genuinely thinks I shouldn't go ahead, do I want them to tell me that I should still do it?
Yeah.
I think you really want the truth. I think everyone really wants the truth. And they don't mind a bit of, back and forth ping pong over, should I or not, convince me I'm wrong kind of thing. That's okay. So yeah, look, I don't mind telling someone when I'm uncomfortable that they're taking on too much risk. And that whole thing, risk profiling, that's a huge area in itself, right? And one of the things that people forget is that you can do a tolerance questionnaire, but that's half the job. you've got capacity as well. The other part of that side is capacity. Okay, just because someone's like has a massively high risk tolerance and they can accept a lot of risk and sleep at night, still doesn't mean to say that they should do this thing that they might not really want to do. If it actually tips them over into a place where if something goes wrong, they go backwards 15 years.
Can we just unpack that a little bit? So we're talking about risk tolerance versus risk capacity.
Yeah.
So what would be some of the examples where people might be able to tolerate the risk? Like, I guess that's more of an emotional response, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're not actually able to recover from a negative outcome.
If someone comes to me and they're very open to risk, but I'm looking at their long-term graphs and what I'm seeing is the position is a little bit borderline. If things don't go perfectly for them, then actually they're at risk of running out of money before they run out of life. And that's a problem. At that point, I'm going, because you've got two options. Some advisors will go, we need to take more risk to make sure that, you get more return, to make sure that things work out. That can be a problematic one because if it doesn't go that way, that looks like bad advice. You've also got to couch that a little bit going, look, I know you want to take more risk, but should we? Because maybe we want to bring it up into the safety bands a little bit. Because here's the thing, if you've got 10 clients, you don't want to be the person that succeeds for one of those 10. You want to be succeeding for all 10.
Ideally, that's what you're there for, yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so sometimes you've got to rein people in a little bit, and that's particularly true with property because, look, sure, wealth accumulation's a thing, leverage is a thing. I'm a big fan, but how you do what you do can be really important. And when you do what you do, people think, I've got to be doing it all the time. People are uncomfortable with having sums of money just sitting around at bank accounts. I'm going, I don't know. I think quite wealthy people have no problem with that, for example. And that's because they go, well, that's okay. That's my keeping my powder dry. Because when something does come along, an opportunity, the right opportunity, at that point I can go, okay, I got the funds, let's go.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think people forget that. This concept of, I've got to have everything invested all of the time. It's like, no, you don't. There's still some smart ways to do things, right? I mean, instead of having money sitting around in emergency savings, if you've got debt still, maybe you have a revolving credit with a zero balance, right?
Great idea.
And you got 30K, 50K. I mean, I've personally got a couple of 100K just because I like the idea of not having to ask the bank for it. And what does that cost me? $6, $8 a month? I don't know, whatever it is. It's fine.
Yeah.
That's good for me to not have to need emergency savings because I've got this other way to do it. That means I can be more effective in the short to medium term, right?
You park your emergency savings somewhere efficient, but
Right.
you have some dry powder.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
Because, as long as you've got something resembling liquid funds, then you can pull that down to do other stuff.
Yeah.
But you got to think about your timing and what it takes too.
Well, okay. So on that then, so
Yeah.
we have this tolerance versus capacity thing. These are all things that are, I guess, speaking to their situation that they find themselves in, but also their personal DNA.
Sure.
And then we have this external macro consideration. We have timing, the market.
Right.
Which I guess with property, it's really easy to think about property shares. Hey, it's all the same thing. It's all investment. It's all about time in rather than timing. And there is a time, ironically, where it is just all about time in. Do you believe that there are times where it's not appropriate to invest? Effectively, you have kind of said that. So
It's not so much that it's not appropriate to invest. It's more that could you benefit from maybe waiting a bit? Tim Farrelly out of Australia did some really cool research around this. He sort of looked at large periods of like the S&P, and he identified that actually, look, it's all very well for a fund manager to say, hey, look, this is the expected return. This is the research we've done. This asset class will get this return. It's like, sure. But if you look at like 10 or 20 year periods of that asset class over time, actually, there's been a very different return depending on if you went in with a lump sum. You got a different return every time, even from year to year, depending on when your entry point was. So, in some ways, you can improve your chances by thinking if you're going to go in with a lump sum and you're not necessarily drip feeding it. Drip feeding is a whole different thing.
Totally,
right?
yeah.
KiwiSaver is a whole different thing, right? We're talking about here maybe going in with a lump sum in the market, and if the market's sort of like looking a bit fluffy, maybe you don't drop a lump sum in at that one point. Like, I mean, Is now a good time to invest? Maybe, but we are looking at indices near their peaks or at their peaks.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. Then it becomes all right. Well, okay, well, where are we theoretically then, economically, and what's our upside from here? Where's our upside? Whereas, of course, if you're entering the market at a relatively lower point because there's been an event, and you don't have to go in the day after the event. Yeah. I mean, the liquidity crisis, I think, was like 18 months to hit bottom.
Yeah.
Any time after day one would have been better than investing before it happened.
Yeah.
So
what you're kind of saying, though, is that, and I think it's important to kind of draw this distinction out of what you're saying, because it's like everything you hear out there, all these tips and tricks around how you should go about investing. Understandably, it has to be simplified to reach a broad audience. Sure. But when people are ready to make action, the problem with hearing simplified Reddit style financial advice is that you miss these nuances, like with lump sum investment versus dollar cost averaging from a zero starting point. Right. Like if you were starting from zero, then of course it doesn't matter what market timing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just start chipping away at it and time in every day. But if you big lump sum, then it's kind of like going outside on a big, really important day, right? You want to dress appropriately.
Yeah.
And so you kind of, like when you're getting into it and when you're getting out of it with a lump sum, you probably do want to think about timing, don't you?
Yeah, you want it. And look,
or cycles. I shouldn't say timing, but like you said before, more like market dynamics. What are the macro conditions, and are you likely to be selling or buying at a high or a low, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And if the market's been coming back and it's still on its way back, it's likely to be a better time than when it's right up at their peaks again.
Sure.
And
I guess it's kind of intuitive, right? Like we know that we had really historically low interest rates for a period of time following March 2020. We then had crazy high house prices and share markets and crypto markets went just crazy, right? And then higher interest rates, more or less, well, the property market really suffered.
Yeah.
Not so much the share market, not so much, but there are, especially when it comes to property, there are factors that you can't understand. Everyday people can understand property probably a little bit easier than share markets, perhaps.
Yeah,
in terms of understanding the relationship between interest rates and property prices. I think a lot of people get that now. Like when one goes down, generally the other one goes up.
Yeah, I mean, unless it doesn't, right? That's the thing, and you end up in a TINA, the acronym. There is no alternative.
Yeah.
Because that can happen too.
You want to expand on what you mean by that, though?
Oh, well, there is no negative correlation. There was the historical concept that, when property might be up, then share markets might be down.
Yes.
Kind of thing.
Yes.
Or in some part of that, you can use your different asset classes to move between cycles, pick one up at use a momentum play, wait till it rides high, pull out, go into another kind of thing. Yes. It's a little bit harder with property because you've got entry and exit costs.
Yes.
And particularly exiting with a real estate agent's fee, that's a big deal. So,
So playing the market and trying to hop and rotate from one sector to another.
You might be getting a bit keen.
Yeah.
You might be getting a bit. And look, to also add to what I said before, just because you're potentially waiting or pausing, you want to be careful that you don't slip into inaction.
Sure.
Because it is still it's still appropriate to take some kind of action at some point. What I guess I'm saying is you might not do it with all of it.
Yes.
And that's where you might go, well, let's chuck a lump sum in now, but not all of it.
Right.
And then work our way towards being fully invested and go from there.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just reducing potential risks of a market downturn when you just chucked all your money in.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I get it.
Yeah. And so you want to be careful of inaction because if you get too used to inaction, then you will stay there for 10 years. I mean, New Zealand is not like the rest of the world, I believe. We are this lovely, relatively safe nation, with Western style democracy, if you will, at the bottom of the South Pacific, a long way from a lot of other people's troubles. And because of that, there is a premium to live here. And that's why when you kind of look at the household to income rate, that list that gets bought out every so often, cities around the world or countries around the world, then you'll find that we consistently rate really highly in that list. And if you look at on the city one, I always find it hilarious. Like every single city in that top 20 is a global center of business in some way. It's Paris, it's London, it's LA, it's New York, right? And then what is Auckland doing there? Why? Why are we there? And the reason why we're there, I think, is because we're a nice place to live. And so because of that, there's a premium to live here. Yeah, it costs more than it should. But equally, we're coming from a low population base. So, there is this kind of thing where actually, if we just keep that immigration pipeline open enough, we can just about import our GDP each year. You're looking at 3% growth. We got your 3% growth right here. Let's just get some more people in,
Yeah.
because they're all going to need
Hey,
places
it's
to
worked so
live.
far.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
right. There's been an aspect to that. It's certainly not true.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good shortcut in terms of making the numbers look good when
Yeah.
really there's not.
But what does that mean? It means when you're looking at property and what it does, and certainly in Auckland, and I think actually COVID had a lot to do, curiously, with the rest of the country playing catch up, or at least outside those main city centres. Because as soon as it was appropriate actually to not be at work every day, well, then you didn't have to be close to work. And what we saw was that all of a sudden around the country, all the other places started getting a bit of a lift. And there was a less of a differential between Auckland to those places than what there previously historically had been, which is a bummer for those people who are thinking, oh, look, I'll just lean in hard and get a massive mortgage in Auckland and then unwind out of it at age 65. That's my strategy, because there's going to be this big old differential when I buy my house in Tauranga.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, there's just not anymore.
Because everybody else has the exact same idea.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, it's the country as a whole, I think, is normalized a little bit in terms of that. There's no longer that massive differential when there may have been previously. Being a nice place to live has been this constant support for property prices, and I always think about the property market where it's at in terms of upward pressures and downward pressures, right? So an upward pressure, and that's an example of an upward pressure, we're a nice place to live. So whenever stuff goes down overseas, it's really horrible. If there's a global recession, it's amazing how many expats come home after that, whether they lose a contract or they just decide to up sticks, and come back with money, and they pump it into a house.
Yeah.
Which is an upward pressure.
That's right.
So a downward pressure obviously looks like what we've just been through. It's like high interest rates, inability to borrow, and also high prices too. But I do wonder now that we've had. Let's face it. I don't know. Look, I became I think a mortgage broker in like 1997. And I mean, that was a bad time to become a mortgage broker, actually, because we'd just come off the Asian crisis.
That's right.
And there was actually banks actually allowed really high levels of borrowing around then. And I was going to try and refinance people into these clever revolving credit loans where they could pay down their mortgage faster. And I was struggling because their houses were worth less than their mortgages.
So between 97 and probably, 2001, you were seeing about that?
Well, yeah. I mean, it took off again in 2001, but there was a bit of a lull there for a bit. And then it did. It took off in 2001.
Interesting. So you actually had problems where the mortgages were actually worth more than the houses were back then.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
That was the thing. It was rough.
Wow.
Because even if you wanted to help and you had someone who was happy to go ahead,
Yeah.
it was, you couldn't necessarily do a lot. You had to wait.
Yeah, yeah. It feels really interesting, right? Again, staying on that 1997 piece for a second. Back then, I'd say the vast majority of borrowers would have gone to the bank directly. Maybe they would have made a decision to buy or sell a home.
Sure.
And they would have taken out a mortgage because that's what their parents always would have done. Just talk to our bank manager.
Yeah.
Gradually shifted towards getting more advice from mortgage advisors. And then probably more recently, there's been a sharp uptick in just the dissemination of, we'll call it wisdom,
Sure.
for lack of a better, accurate, qualitative term for it. But there has been this dissemination of information, that's a better term, around, hey, these are the best ways to go about it. These are the things to watch out for. So people are generally a little bit more clued up.
Yeah.
Right?
There's more useful information out there now than there historically was. And I just think that's partly because providing information now is a useful way to get recognized.
Right.
Right?
Marketing.
Podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Podcasts are great for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if you can do like learning, networking,
Oh, that's right.
and marketing at the same time. It's
yeah,
awesome.
exactly.
Professional development.
Well,
Take it
that's
off your
right.
list.
So,
Yeah.
and if anything, we've almost got the opposite problem now. There's now so much information we don't know where to start.
Yeah.
We don't know how to curate that. And
Yes.
so in some ways, because there is too much data and you don't know how to rate it or score it or what's right or what's not, I just think that actually reinforces why you want to find a good advisor,
Yeah.
because it's their entire job to do that. They've spent a lifetime in their career doing that very thing, understanding, clients, behavioral finance, and understanding couple dynamics, and understanding, product or investment or insurance or whatever it might be, and then how all those things fit together to
think
find the right result.
Do you think some of the mindsets that people have get in the way of that? Like, say, you touched on some really interesting things that are like dynamics between couples, trying to interpret different sort of theses like, hey,
Yeah,
should we buy
absolutely.
an investment property for capital gains or
Yeah.
buy it for yield? Been told this, but this person said that. Do you find that the surplus of information makes it way more likely that people suffer from inaction, or they're more likely to select the wrong answer for them? Like how is the market, I guess, kind of responding to this surplus information that seems to
Yeah.
abound lately?
I mean, it's easy for me to say things like, find a good advisor. And of course, the obvious response to that was, well, how do I do that?
Yeah.
Right. And, and other parts, I mean, I think even as close as Australia, there's these websites where you can, review your advisor kind of thing and rate and score. And God, I don't like those. Just because the ability for them to be so wrong is really, really obvious in their design.
How do you think the market will evolve, though, right? Like, because we have technology that's picking up where it won't be that long. Well, it's kind of already here, where just obtaining a mortgage, for example, staying on the property piece,
Yeah.
is going to be easy. It's just an engineering problem, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Choose
sure.
from the bank, get it done, replicate what it is that you're after. You can even get AI that tells you how you should structure the mortgage for your long-term goals. So that part's not going to be an issue pretty soon.
Yeah.
So do you think that either the market or the financial advice community is cognizant of that, and are they adapting fast enough to
mean,
meet the real demand?
I am, because I
get it,
I
yeah.
get it. I've been cash flow modeling since 2001, and yet largely it's still brand new here. I mean, people say, "Oh, Royden, you've got this cool software," and I go, "Yeah, I do." And they're like, "How are you finding that in terms of delivering that to market?" And it's like it's kind of hard because the analogy I give is a car yard one. If you're selling cars for a living, people come to your car yard and go, "I like that car," and they give you some money for it and they drive that car away. People come to our car yard and most of them kind of go, "Man, I'm really interested in driving that car. Will you teach me to drive?" Because they're showing someone how to use software and then they're showing someone how to rearrange their paradigm for how they deliver advice, how they are as an advisor. That is a very different thing. Financial planners use our stuff, but you don't have to be a financial planner to use it. And it's very, very specifically designed almost as a sneak attack by me to say, hey, if you deliver advice in this way, you will do better. You will sell more. People will love you more. You will stop talking about products so much. It's no longer just about that. It's about who they are, what they're doing, where they're going. And because those reasons, this product suits you in these types and in this amount and in this structure.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's
people
where
get that.
Yeah,
That's
consumers
what
are
I
there.
love.
Like consumers are there, right?
Yeah.
Consumers kind of probably already expect that. Like the ones that I talk to anyway seem to be, well, of course that's what I want.
I know,
Right?
right?
But I don't think
Advisors
that's what
don't
they-
always get it. That's
No.
that's the wild thing to me. Advisors don't get it, or if they do, they don't get it enough.
Right.
It's that difference between sort of like knowing something's true and then
Seeing it's true.
yeah, well, and believing it. There's a difference between acknowledgement of a thing and living it, I think. And I think we're a long way off that yet. And here's the problem too, is that New Zealand is well behind the rest of the world when it comes to this sort of stuff. If you go to an advisor in the US, the UK, or even Australia, you almost expect that they would have a tool that would tell the advisor and you about you and show you, what's going to happen next. We didn't get that in New Zealand because we're so small. All those software companies simply looked at us and kind of went, nah.
Yeah, that's right. Can't be bothered.
Yeah. And, it's we've missed out on that. The whole industry's missed out on that. And because we've missed out on it, then we also get the secondary effect where we've just figured it out another way.
Yes.
We don't have to do that anymore. There are perfectly globally accepted ways of doing this kind of thing and doing it the right way with all the training you could hope for. And so, yeah, look, Planalytics is kind of me going, you know what? It's going to take a lot of effort and resource. I get that. And I'm hoping, fingers crossed, it'll pay off. And it is, which is lovely.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of warm fuzzies from advisors who then come back to us and go, you know what, this has actually changed my world. I think about how I was operating 12 months ago. I would not go back there.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm a fantastic case study. Well, I believe I am because...
Well, you're perfect for it because you already actually have all that understanding. You were kind of thinking about these things anyway. Well, you were doing it, exactly. Yeah. And now you've just got a way to do it focused in one tool in front of someone in real time. And it's fun, right?
It's so enjoyable because now you're free to actually do what you do well. And I think everybody's probably like this with no matter what they do, right? Like if you were a plumber, if you were a teacher, if you were a fisherman, if you were a doctor, whatever it is, there's probably one part of your role that you really enjoy.
Yeah.
And then the other parts, you kind of just tolerate it, right? And I know for me, it's creative problem solving, and it's
Yeah.
kind of jumping inside their brain and
Yeah.
then helping them to see the world a slightly different way,
Totally.
which helps align those two pieces, the inside and the outside. And if there's anything that kind of really grinds my gears a little bit with our industry is that we're kind of bogged down with so many things that are taking away from our ability to do that.
Sure.
And we're not really armed with the tools of being able to deal with it. For example, saying no to potential difficult clients. Like that's a tough skill to say, hey, no, I'm not going to deal with you because I'm not the right person for you.
Boundaries, right?
Yeah, boundaries. But not
Yeah.
because they're a bad person, but because actually you need to be seeing this type of person. You need to probably see an accountant because
Yeah.
your business is there's some real concerns there.
Oh, yeah. And I feel that there's a similar threshold. And because, you know, because I do touch on so much of their world, you know, and the information we find out and flush out about people, I mean, often their family won't know that stuff, you know.
right.
You know, it's critical information about who they are and how they run their world and how they think about things and what they want to do. And I do find that sometimes, particularly when things are challenging, that you can cross over into counseling,
Oh, totally.
and you've got to be careful.
Yeah.
Because unless you've had some kind of training in that, you've got to recognize where that line is, right? And it's the same with legal and tax advice too. You know, I'm experienced enough that I can talk about a lot of stuff at a high level, but I always say, hey, not an accountant, not a lawyer. You know, great that we can take these ideas and get in the room with your other professionals. And if we need to do that, and if I need to run that and get everyone on the same page and working together, you'll probably save you a lot of money than if you went to see them separately.
Yes.
You know?
Totally.
Yeah. And that's I think a good way to do it. But yeah, I mean, I actually love to pick up some sociology papers or some therapy papers or some counseling papers or something, because that whole, you know, psychology thing and then where it crosses over into personal finances, God, it's interesting. It's
I did
interesting.
a certificate in counseling.
Did you?
Before I got into this?
Really?
And,
Okay.
I didn't. Much like my touch typing course that I did in school.
Yeah.
It's like I didn't realize I would use that skill
Right? Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
You like anything, you figure it out as you go, right? But you're right, and I think when you're shifting from product to people, it's not so much about analyzing and figuring out the right product for the person. It's
Yeah.
about the right person
Yeah.
and where are they going, and then what needs to sort that out. And you know, sometimes it's not me, sometimes
Yeah.
it's somebody else, sometimes it's not the solution. And I think being able to be free to do that makes a lot of sense. So you have to get the revenue model right.
Yep.
You have to get the technology right. You
Yeah.
have to understand the market for your skills, but also the regulation. So on the regulation part, how, like, I know when you come from a financial planning perspective and you're following a pretty distinct process using technology,
Sure.
which is very fact based, and it's
There's
quite
a lot of
transparent.
compliance built in.
Yeah. Well, by naturally there is. But do you find that the compliance supports most advisors in delivering a higher quality of advice for the right person? Or do you find that at the moment anyway, and this is a bit of a loaded question, do you find that at the moment compliance might be distracting a little bit for some advisors?
It's definitely distracting for some advisors. One of the big problems I think here is that concept of advice in isolation.
Okay.
You know, if you're giving someone advice on one thing, whether it's, and I'll use investment advice for a second, you might build someone a really fantastic portfolio, right? But if you actually haven't asked them enough questions about what their world and what they're trying to do and where they're trying to go, and flushed out actually a whole bunch of things that would completely change your advice on that subject, but if you didn't ask those questions, was that good advice? Right? And you can apply that to just about any other advice stream. It's that concept of not going wide enough. And so this is why the KYC piece, the know your client piece, is actually so critical. And it's a huge focus because it actually aids in that compliance piece so much. If you ask enough questions and if you ask the right questions, whatever kind of advice you give is going to be better. And you'll be able to point to it. You know, and that's why the graphs is so great, because with so many other advice firms, they're having to think about, financial vulnerability. Do I have a vulnerable client here? You know, And
Other
how do we
suspicious
deal with
activities
that?
or yeah.
Well, I mean, it's it's an interesting one. For example, I want to use investment as a thing again. If you've come out of like private banking, or if you're maybe share broking or something, if you're the sort of advisor that goes, I'm kind of guru side, I will put you an amazing bespoke portfolio together, and you will love it. It's like, okay. But if you hadn't realized, I don't know, maybe that person needed to go into care, or they hadn't got aspects of their estate and tax planning right, or they had certain factors in their world which meant actually they were going to exit from large amounts of money for whatever reason, or if they just actually wanted to be more philanthropic, who knows what it could be. If something just goes wrong in their world, if you're not close enough to that person, then maybe they were vulnerable and you didn't even know it. And it might have been an emotional thing too. If they've lost a partner, if the other person was the decision maker and now they've got all this money, maybe they're a mess and you just didn't find out.
Yeah.
So it's why I do what I do in the way that I do it, because I love flushing out. You give me more information, I'm going to make a better decision for you.
Oh, and that's always the truth, right?
Yeah.
The more context you have, the better it is. And there'll always be somebody that just wants to focus on the product itself. Show me the best return.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? But,
And that's totally fair. And that's not to say that you would build a bad portfolio or something.
that's right. I know.
It's like I'm going to ask you these questions and then do a really bad job on the thing that you came to me for. No, that's not what we're saying here. But yeah, look, advice in isolation, where it crosses over to compliance, is hard, because if you're not, I mean, the graphs tell me if someone's financial, if there's a financial vulnerability. They don't necessarily tell me if there's an emotional vulnerability, but I try to ask enough questions to find that out, right? And this is the other problem. Going back to the whole risk profiling thing, the software is a capacity tester. If you're just doing risk profiling and asking someone risk tolerance questions, thinking that your profiling job is done, it's not. And this is why I find it really dangerous, where there's advisors out there who will send someone through a tolerance profiling questionnaire that leads directly into a portfolio allocation and thinking that's compliant. I don't know.
So, and just so that people understand what you're talking about here. So let's say they fill out a questionnaire saying, hey, if the market dropped by 40%, I would do this.
Yeah.
Or do I generally like to take risks? So doing a questionnaire like that and then receiving a recommendation to invest in a 80-20 portfolio of growth and income assets, you've missed a couple of steps here, really.
Well,
but from a certain perspective, like especially in the context of KiwiSaver, that's probably about as much as you're going to get in terms of analysis. Would that be fair?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And KiwiSaver's, once again, KiwiSaver's a little bit different. I mean, the vast majority of people are going to be in there for a really long time. It's drip fed, so that reduces the risk in itself.
True.
Right? You're always buying, you're always buying, you're always buying.
Dollar
And if
cost
you're not starting off with a high balance, once again, that reduces your risk. Arguably, you can take a higher risk profile in that kind of scenario, because you don't have the risk of a larger amount dropping before you need it.
Yes.
That's the concern. But another thing too is that actually, well, hang on. We might be coming into a potential market down cycle, but KiwiSaver is obviously one part of the considerations as well. So it might not be appropriate to actually downsize their risk, even if they're close to 65, because so what? They're going to live to 95 or 100.
Right.
So actually, we've still got a really long time. And guess what? That's not all of their money. Maybe that's only 30% of their money. And actually, part of the strategy was to stay invested in an aggressive portfolio because we had other money coming in from elsewhere. And whether we stay with that KiwiSaver provider or shift it out and put it in a portfolio of a different kind,
That's a really good example. And this came up, must have been this week actually, with one of the people that I was talking to, that the question came up. They were in their 70s. What type of risk setting should we have? So like, what kind of portfolio should we be with our KiwiSaver? It was a relatively small amount compared to everything else. But hey, should we be dialing up the risk, keeping it where it's at, or dialing down the risk in light of the fact that we are, going to be spending this money probably in the next 20 years-ish?
Yeah.
But what was going on as well is that they were going to be selling their $3 million home and buying a $1 million home and creating what we call a liquidity event.
Absolutely.
$2 million cash floating around. Well, do they really need to be conservative in their KiwiSaver in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be right-sizing a significant asset. And look, I mean, I've had that, I remember one particular sort of elderly lady I was looking after, and she's going, oh, look, I've only got $400,000. And that's going to last me my whole life. And I was like, no, it doesn't. you're planning to sell your 10 acres.
In Remuera.
Well, it wasn't Remuera, but it was still significant enough that it made a enough sense. It said, look, we can actually plan to have this active early retirement where you actually plan on spending that capital. It's okay because you're going to get this, even if the market goes down, we can do some sensitivity analysis around that. You're still going to have enough when you sell the other and go into that retirement home that you've already sort of put a deposit on. Actually, you're going to be fine.
Do you find that that's a common concern? And I want to kind of maybe drill into a few common myths, misconceptions, concerns, or just dilemmas that you have to deal with, right? Like the downsizing one in particular, where people have been told from other advisors in the past, hey, never think of your home as an investment vehicle. And there's some truth to that, but they miss the nuance that don't forget at some stage, if you do downsize or right size, you're going to release some cash and that's going to make an impact. Like that's one massive one. But what are some of the other common things that you come across that people don't generally realize until you're in front of them and you're kind of stumbling across it?
God, there's so many of those. The one that's immediately popped into mind actually is people who stay in their home too long and they don't go to that second home.
Okay.
You know, if they're not out of their home by 80, moving after that point is way bigger deal. And that's fine. They might not have to. They might end up in a situation where they can get the care they need and never have to go to that second dwelling. But, you know, everyone ends up in a room at some point. You know, you start out life in a room, you get your own bedroom, right? You end up in your own bedroom again, you know, unless you die suddenly. You know, there's a process there where, there's a house you live in the middle. But before that, it's somebody else's house because you're growing up there.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's somebody else's house too because you've bought a license to occupy.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Or a room, you know, hospital room. I mean, my grandmother who passed away only a couple of years ago was 98. Had an incredible innings. I mean, she was at the care facility. She was at 8 years. And she was at somewhere else before then. You know, it was a staged process for her going down to that one room. You know, so you know that's a thing.
What about live off capital versus consume capital?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. There is this misconception that people have to retire with $1 million and it never should go down.
Yeah, live off the
right?
fruit, right?
Yeah. You know, and so like invest it and we're only going to spend the interest. It's like no, and it all comes down to actually what you need to spend or what you want to spend.
Yeah.
You know, it's such a wide conversation because you want to find out, obviously, and this is why I ask so many questions. It's like, who are your kids? You know, do you have actually children that you need that might come back at you? You know, is there going to be, was there a failure to launch? Maybe there's a disability and you have to look after someone in your retirement that couldn't make it on their own. I mean, if you don't flush that out, you know, how much capital someone needs is going to be quite different. Maybe it's just how you want to live, you know. Do you want to have that two phases, that two-stage retirement where you're actually trying to actively get as much while you're still able?
Yes.
Right? To spend some capital, but not reduce it so much so that if you do live another 20 years after that point, that you don't run out too soon.
Exactly, yeah.
Right?
That's right.
It's that whole sort of running out of money before you run out of life thing.
And there's a lot of levers you have to pull, isn't there?
There's a lot of levers you got to pull. So the only way to figure that out is through modeling. That's the thing. And that's why I loved it so much. It's like, ooh, we can figure this out. This is a puzzle. This is a fun puzzle. We can do this.
Yes.
Right? And this actually going back to something you were saying before, that's a really hard thing to do off the internet. This is another reason why I think you need advisors. Because unless you've got the right tool and know how to use it and are competent in running it, then actually you might make some mistakes there. You might get some things wrong. Even right down to something as simple as, hey, look, I've got this cool bit of kit I've been able to access. Because you can, for example, get Planalytics without being advised. And you can then overwrite the returns. And if you don't understand that the returns that are already defaulted in the system are real returns set to an age and stage of life, and you go, I can get better than that. And if you chuck in, 7% rather than the 3% and don't realize that actually inflation is ground zero here.
Yes.
And these are all real returns. And what you've just chucked in is an enormous real return. And if you gross that back up, 7% might look like 16 or 18, depending on you and your world and your tax rate.
Yeah.
You know,
if you're investing a certain amount per month and you started with, say, $100,000 in your investment account and you've put in a 7% rate of return without realizing that actually, no, the return that you should be putting in that box is after fees, after tax, after inflation.
Yeah.
then you've just grossly overestimated the amount that
You
you're
will
going to
blow
have
your
there.
graphs out and you'll probably J-curve. And I see it all the time actually with investment property in the software.
So J-curve, can you just clarify what that means?
Where your graph goes from a something that looks quite reasonable and modest to way too much money.
Yes.
And why is it doing that?
Yeah. In other words, like an exponential curve. So you
Yeah,
might not have enough at
absolutely.
retirement by the looks
Yeah.
of it, but then all of a sudden as time goes on, it goes like
And,
$20 million.
and the longer you graph, the worse it gets. And of course, because we're graphing out to 100, if someone's 40 now, well, that's 6 decades for something to go nuts.
Yes.
So it's really interesting with property. I see it a lot. You know, when I entered the world of finance in 1997, the gross yield on an Auckland rental property was about 3 to 4%, depending on where it was.
Sure.
Well, you fast forward to today, and the gross yield on an Auckland property is about 3 to 4%, depending on where it is. You know, sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on those wider factors. And if you can get 5.5, then you've got a killer yield for Auckland, right? So curiously, what that means is that it's entirely possible that rental properties, the rent is rising theoretically each year over time with whatever the gross yield is, right? So that's how the software does it. And what tends to happen is that, you do kind of get that double every so many years.
So you're talking about
right?
double in terms of the value of the property.
Well,
which-
yeah, but of course the point
feedback
is
loop.
the rent. It's a feedback loop. The
Yeah.
rent is following it at that yield.
Right, because if it's a 4% yield, for example, in the property values, then that 4% is calculated based on the property value.
Yep.
And so you get this acceleration in terms of the rate of growth. Right?
You do. And what that means is that even though the software is designed to have everything in today's dollars, if you're not careful about the rates you use for investment, but particularly for investment property,
Yes.
then those graphs will J-curve.
that,
And
yeah.
if you times that by 5 properties or 6 properties, it just gets silly. And you've got to take that with a grain of salt. And often I would say, look, you know what? You can set every property a different capital gain depending on where it is. And I just say, look, just dial it down. We've had 2 full decades, right?
Yes.
We had 2 full decades from like 2001 when the property market took off and through to now. I mean, this is the first genuine downturn I think we've had in the longest, right? Liquidity crisis, sure. Some pockets really got hit hard. I remember, sections around Mangawai when all those farmers were slicing up bits of dirt, trying to cash in on that coastal property thing. And that for a while that worked. But then of course there was an oversupply. And when people went, actually, I can't afford a coastal property right now, and I'm not absolute beachfront, so the prices went down on those. So I think anyway, what's happened now is we've got so many zeros. Sure, just because you can borrow debt doesn't mean you should. This is another thing that people, I think, don't quite understand. The ability to borrow $2 million is not the same thing as paying off $2 million. You got to have crazy surpluses to pay off $2 million in a 10-year time frame. Crazy surpluses. But sometimes I say to them, it's like, guys, there's a lot of risk here. Maybe you want to back off a little and put in a little bit more certainty in case something happens.
Yeah.
Because people do lose their jobs. And then, like in the market we've got now, people are struggling. Trying to find that job again, it can be really hard.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, especially lately in the last, maybe in the last 18 months or so, just the whole, and I guess maybe it's been brought up with maybe a few clients I've seen recently that have had, say, 3 or 4 properties already relatively high value properties.
Yeah.
Seeing what you just said there before with the J curve, the exponential growth in terms of their wealth, especially after retirement, but pre-retirement, there is this massive concern of concentration of wealth in illiquid, non-divisible investments, property.
Yeah.
Which is like what you're saying. Let's say they have a situation where they've lost income for a season. Well, it's highly possible that could be happening during a market downturn.
Yeah.
And if all of their wealth is tied up into these assets that are indivisible, you got to sell the whole thing, and then you're going to liquidate something at a loss potentially.
And if you're leaning in too hard, the whole thing can domino too, right? That's the thing. Particularly if and this is why they say, if you're going to take that approach, don't do it all in one bank.
Yeah.
For me, part of it is assuming that we get what we've always gotten with property. If we're taking the last 20 years, I think almost that's a dangerous period to take, right? Because historically, I think it could become at least an outlier. We don't know, because the ability to borrow is not the same thing as the ability to pay all that money off, which means what happens if actually these prices start to slow down, the value creep starts to slow down. Now, if you've engineered your portfolio in a way that you're topping up 30K a year, now on current rates, that's fine. That's going to fall. It was a real problem for all those clients who are on 3% and gearing up. I was going, I just want to show you what happens. This looks doable for you. You're only funding 30K a year on this lower stuff. But, if it goes to 7 or 8, and they go, what do you mean? That seems huge. I go, hey, there was a long time there when 7% was our long run average interest rate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That was what we should be expecting, actually. But I'm kind of going, you know what? If we don't get that expected growth rate over time, that 30K you're losing every year to topping up your portfolio, are you going to get it back? And what's the opportunity cost there? Could you actually achieve a similar result with less risk somewhere else?
And what would that be if it was somewhere else? And so now we're probably at the part of the conversation where we've kind of talked a bit about property and some of the challenges there. But if there was another strategy, and we know there is, what is the best sort of dip your toe in the water thing to suggest to people who are relatively property centric up until they see you? And I know that you're fairly balanced. It's not like you try to take people there or there.
Yeah.
Like what's the first thing that you try to introduce to people as a potential solution for, especially if they've been very property centric thus far and that's how they've built their wealth?
Yeah, like sometimes people have to wrap their head around the fact that if they've done really well, they don't need to keep their foot down on the accelerator.
Right. Yeah.
That's a choice.
Don't build
People
just because you
forget
can. Yeah.
Right? If you've done really well and you continue to, lean in hard, if it's a strategy that works and is going to continue to work, that's fine. But it doesn't always. Some people actually, they don't realize it, but they actually got lucky with when they bought or what they bought. And here's the other thing too. People never talk at barbecues about the properties that sent them backwards.
Yeah.
That actually there's a lot. It's just embarrassing to go, oh, you must be an idiot if you can't make money out of property. Anyone can make money out of property. No. There is plenty of room to lose money in property. And it's not even your fault necessarily. Sometimes stuff that goes wrong, buildings become leaky and throw you under a bus. So that's why I always say, look, there's nothing wrong with going into property. It's great. But, do it from a position of strength if you can. Try not to do it from a position of weakness, because if anything goes wrong, you're just going to go back twice as far. So, there's all of that stuff roped in. But yet, if we're talking about different strategies, then, here's a cute one. One of my clients comes to me, brand new client, and, they've got a home and they've got a batch and they rent out that batch, so it's a rental income, and they've got a rental property too. And they've also got sort of like, close enough to $500,000 worth of shares. But they've also got close enough to $500,000 of debt over their own home. And that was just how it all came together. It was pretty hodgepodge, And I go, hey, are you aware that this is just personal debt, right? There's no interest deductibility there. And they're like, yeah. I'm going, but you got this portfolio of liquid funds over here. It's like, yeah. It's like, were you aware that if you actually sold that down, completely repaid your debt, and then reborrowed that same debt, and then reinvested what you borrowed into, those shares or whatever they might be, that the debt you just created would now be tax deductible? And they're like, what?
Blowing my mind.
Why has nobody ever told me that before? Yeah. And it's because it's the reason for the borrowing, for the same reason that interest is exactly. It's exactly the same rule. So how you do what you do can sometimes be a factor. And people don't forget that, they say, oh, the property allows you to leverage. It's like, yeah, but any property allows you to leverage. If you borrowed that money over your own home and invested, it's still leverage. Yeah. Now, as long as you've got a long-term time frame, and you're doing it responsibly and sensibly, it's fine.
I think what you just described there is just such again, people should be getting their own independent advice around this, of course, but it's such a good example of just how a holistic top-down look at things can make a big difference, because yeah, you're right. You've got a $500,000 mortgage. Let's say you're paying 8% on the floating rate. Well, you actually have to earn your income first, pay tax on it, and then you pay that 8%. Yeah. And then you're getting a $500,000 investment portfolio, you're getting returns off that, but you're actually paying tax on some of those returns too. So what you're doing is you're kind of just getting rid of the mortgage right away, borrowing it again, and there's a way to do that to actually make it clear you're drawing a line in the sand that you actually borrowed for that purpose, and that's important.
It is.
But what you're doing is you're effectively creating a tax deductible pile of debt, which means now that their effective interest rate adjusted for tax is a lot lower. And so
It's a lot
you're
lower.
increasing the return by not an insignificant amount
Yeah.
when you consider all things. But I guess intellectually, it's hard for people to understand.
It's a much bigger leap for people.
Yeah, even though it's the same end
Yeah.
position, right?
They've got no problems going into significant amounts of debt on a single asset. But they've got huge problems going into debt across a really, really diversified portfolio of stuff. It's like, well, what if it goes down? Well, what if your property goes down? Well, they just won't sell it. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And I've asked this question with a lot of other people as well, so I'm not just picking on you here, but where does this aversion to all things not property,
Yeah.
where does it come from in the New Zealand psyche?
Oh, I mean, the obvious one to point at is, 1986. We took longer to come back than just about anywhere else in the world. It was was it 12 years or something? Seriously. I mean, the American share market, I think, took 18 months. I think we took 12 years, something like that.
That's right.
I forget the number exactly, but it took ages.
No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
It would have been, early
And that
2000s.
destroyed people's confidence. But worse than that, too, is that there was also, in the run up to that, I mean, people forget that it actually doubled in the 12 months going up, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and of course, but it was worse than that because a lot of those companies, they were paper companies. They weren't really. I mean, they disappeared.
Yeah.
They went bust.
Yeah.
And it's because they actually weren't good investments in the first place. They weren't good businesses in the first place. So just because you can create a business and then list, once again, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
But that was the 80s for you. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on. And I think we didn't learn enough. We learned that we learned some wrong lessons from that. And you touched on it before, we shouldn't tell people what to think. Sometimes I think we have to adjust their thinking for sure. If they have wrong thinking, still got to be able to evidence what you mean and what you say and why. But, it's important that we're persuasive. Not just from a sales perspective, but actually that if somebody is thinking the wrong thing, it's important that we're persuasive in an inoffensive way, as much as we can be, to actually get them back on track. Why not? I don't know if I am. That's why I got to say that. I can be polarizing, and I know it.
Yeah.
But that's why also, you got to find an advisor that's right for you.
Yeah. It's okay to be, polarizing as long as you're polarizing from the right perspective for that person.
Absolutely.
That's the hard part, right?
Yeah. With me, it's with me, it's always about, trying to do the right thing, trying to get somebody winning, and avoiding some of those pitfalls and stuff and mistakes people make along the way. I often find people do actually better than expected. They do better than the planning actually, which is nice. But sometimes you'll get people. I called it golden boy syndrome because it happened to my father, and I watched him. I've learned so many mistakes. Learned so many things from my dad watching him make mistakes over the years, because it's not that he wouldn't fail to get ahead. He would. He'd do great sometimes, but then he'd manage to mess it up.
Right.
And so one of the things I would see him do is he'd get into a position where he had lots of choices and options, and what would happen is that he'd then get excited about something and make a decision, and he didn't actually do the due diligence he needed to do.
Sure.
And he just had this thing in his head where, I'm successful now. But he didn't realize that the reason why he was successful in the first place is because he was paying a very special kind of attention, and he actually, there were reasons why he succeeded that don't necessarily automatically apply to the thing you're going to do next, my guy.
Just because you're successful in one field doesn't mean you're going to be in another field.
Exactly.
Right.
And people will often do really well in the thing that they do, end up with this stuff and go, oh, now I'm going to do this.
Yes.
And at that moment, I always want to go, hey, let's just have a woe back here for a second.
Right.
Let's look at this. Let's run some numbers. Let's take a chill pill and just
don't take credit for what the market does on its own.
Yeah, right.
Just recognize
and this is
when
another
you're ahead,
thing, right? And I think crypto was one of those funny things. People, plenty of crypto millionaires. Well, there were. There was also plenty of crypto losses too, right? People lost a hell of money. But once again, not cool to talk about that at parties.
Right. Well, you're going to the wrong parties, man.
Maybe I am. I love a good loss story. I think that's, being vulnerable about going hideously backwards, I think can be a powerful thing to share.
I think so.
Yeah.
As long as you're not trying to build up your own credibility.
Well, right. Yeah.
That's another matter.
Yeah.
Hey, let's finish up on the topic of fees, because I love this topic, because I came from a not too dissimilar position to you. I started off a little bit later, but doing mortgages exclusively.
Right.
And so I didn't charge fees at all up until probably only maybe, I don't know, 10, 10, 12 years ago or so, and noticed a complete turnaround in terms of how the power dynamics happened, the type of people that I was seeing, how
Yeah.
much I enjoyed the work. Makes an absolute 100% difference. And I know what I'm offering for the fees. I'm not offering promises of a better return. I'm offering advice, and what that advice does, we can't guarantee what that is going to be, but we try our very best to increase the odds that it leads to success, right?
Yeah.
When consumers on the other end look at fees, and they're going to be looking at the fees they pay in KiwiSaver and managed funds, in doing trades like commissions at their online brokerage, or fees for a financial advisor. What are some of the things that you wish people understood about what they were getting for those fees?
Yeah, I guess I'll start answering that by this one thing that I like to say, and that's a single piece of advice can either make you or save you thousands, and it will most likely have nothing to do with any product, right? Strategy, that high level perspective about what you're doing, where you're going, zigging and zagging, with making big decisions, how you do a thing can make a huge difference. And you don't get that necessarily from the internet because it's specific to you and your world. And it's not about the product. So that's, I guess, for me, the leading point. People often, when it comes to specific things, in terms of and KiwiSaver, for example, they'll go, oh, simplicity, very low fees. Yes, that's true. And then Milford may be higher. It's like, certainly more than simplicity. But they don't often realize or take note of the fact that actually all those projected returns, they're all after those fees.
That's right. The numbers that you're comparing are actually after fees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's fees. But, if a provider is consistently doing well over time, over and above those fees, maybe they're worth those fees. And you shouldn't be focusing on the fees, and it's the same thing with mortgages and people who like interest rate shop, right? One bank versus another. It's like, oh, yeah, but they're going to give me this nth of a degree off my interest rate that's better than the other bank. It's like, yeah, but that other bank has, I don't know, maybe an offset mortgage facility that bank doesn't have. And that offset mortgage facility is going to enable you to do X and Y and Z.
Which is what I told you should do. So that's just the cost of it.
Yes. So sometimes strategy is more powerful than the relative cost or the relative gain. Minute. And people go, oh, they don't also do their maths. The difference between, 10 basis points over a year on the amount of money that they're talking about, that tranche, if they actually ran it through their calculator, it might be a couple of $100. So what?
A year.
Yeah, a year. It's like, so what?
So obviously we're talking about, there's a bit of another layer there, right? So if I was a consumer and I was looking to, I guess, get a better result, there is the tendency to focus on product, from an advisor's perspective, but more so from a consumer's perspective. And if you're focusing on the product, then you're going to be forced into a situation where you look at the fee and you look at the performance and you go, well, if I pay more, I might get more performance. Right?
Also another thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas all fees are not the same, right? Because if you're now not looking at the product, you're looking at someone who specializes in the people, they specialize in the strategy, not the tools.
Yeah.
Then you're paying a fee. It's not necessarily because you're going to get access to better performance, but you might actually get the thing, which is hard to quantify, which is the one bit of advice that either saves them or makes them everything.
Yeah, totally.
So it's really hard, isn't it, to kind of
It is.
reverse engineer this and go, right, well, I'm going to make some decisions on who I approach, what I hold as my financial products based on the fees. It's almost like, those fees really are like really well down. Like they are important, yes. But I think the marketing firms and the PR firms associated with these large fund managers have done a pretty good job of muddying the waters to some degree. And even, dare I say, the regulator has made this a little bit too much of a big deal. Like it's important. We don't want to be ripped off.
Yeah, totally.
No one wants that.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. A lot of that money makes a big difference over a lifetime, but you're missing the bigger story here.
Yeah, I mean, even that concept of active versus passive, it's like, sure, but, I don't hear enough people talking about, well, active versus passive from a New Zealand perspective, Because if you're trying to engineer a passive portfolio and from New Zealand, well, actually, you've got issues that a manager in the States wouldn't have with exactly the same investments, because Forex is the thing. you know?
Fifth rules is the thing.
Exactly. So, it's all very well tracking an index, but, you got to get close to make it worth it, and that's something that people don't ask. And, and then there's different rules as well. When it comes to, because like if you're taking a passive approach because you like your ETFs, great, that's cool. But some ETFs in similar sectors will behave quite differently because they've got reweighting rules that differ from each other.
Okay.
So unless you're drilling down into that kind of detail, I don't know. I mean, that's a job.
It is a job.
Do you want to do that job?
Yeah. Well, you could if you really wanted to,
Well,
but I
yeah.
guess what is your hourly rate?
I was talking more about sort of like, because people do try and DIY this stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was coming from.
Yeah, and I know that there's a couple of there's one guy, I don't know if you've come across this guy, Rob Berger. I think he's a fairly big YouTuber in the States, but
Okay.
he's just a retired person. He used to be a financial commentator, and he's a retired person, and he just talks about how he manages his investments. Now he used to write for, I think, Financial Times. I'm not quite sure, and so he's quite familiar with the products and stuff over there, and he's all over it. And that's his like full-time job, is to talk about it, review it, and then do it himself. If that's who you are, that's great, DIY, right? But the bigger your balance gets, the more, well, with anything, right? Like the more skin in the game you have, the bigger the stake, the more you kind of want to pay money for other people
Even
to
if it's
actually
just
manage
somebody
it,
to
right?
have a second opinion on it. Like I mean, I've got a client that comes and sees me every so often, and I just charge him an annual fee for access to the software and to come and see me once a year, and or if he feels like ringing me, which he never does. He's very respectful about that. He was another one of these people that came and saw me for a session. And I went, you know what? There's nothing for me to do here. You're running your own portfolio, and you really enjoy it. It's not completely awful. I don't know if I'd do it exactly the same, but I also don't see huge risk in it either.
Yeah.
You've got a couple of investment properties. They're really low gearing. You guys have done everything well and really nothing wrong. Keep at it. And he was kind of like, well, you're the third person I've seen and nobody said that yet. It's like, that actually intrigued him enough to actually go away and then come back, which I thought was lovely. And that was so nice. In fact, he even referred a couple of people in the interim between coming back. But now we've made it an official annual thing.
Yeah.
And I charge him fees, and he goes, "Look, how's it looking?" And I'll do a bit of analysis on what he's doing and how he's doing it. It's always a fun chat.
Yeah.
It's always a fun catch up, and I get paid for my time, and that's fun. It's not your standard or I guess typical advisor engagement, but it's a service I offer, and it works for both parties.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's sometimes that's all you need to do is have somebody else external to your world give you some different perspective, who's a professional, to say, hey, what you're doing isn't stupid. And it does happen more often than not. And like you say, people enjoy it, so why take it away from them?
Well, that's right. And look, and the other thing too is that sometimes if you're the sort of person that is doing that and you think you're doing a good job of it, you still want a pair of professional eyes going, you know what? I just need to know if I'm right about these things. I think I'm right. And if I can pay for someone's time, I'm happy to do that, to actually agree, then actually I feel so much better about that.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Even from an advisor's perspective, like I've received tremendous value this year, especially catching up with you guys every now and then, just running through some cases as like peer review. And it's super, super valuable. And that's kind of what I think, I could be wrong, but I think as time goes on, that type of service, this whole done with you service is, I hope, because I think it's genuinely good for people, but I think it will become more popular as the means to execute and the accessibility towards all investment solutions becomes easier.
Absolutely.
People will be able to do it easily, and whatever the problem is, technology fills it.
Yeah.
But they still need that independent professional perspective to cast their eyes over it. So as it relates to Planalytics, the software platform that we've been talking about, if people want to sign up for it, they can. I know that there's a lot of advisors that are using it. I'm one of them, of course, and I provide access before and after our advice sessions, just standard. But can people actually access the software themselves directly?
They absolutely can. They can get it themselves and pay for it themselves. And we're pretty good about letting them be hands off, and they'll sign up for a while and they'll go away again. I've got no idea, because we want to be hands off. if they're getting the value that they need or anything. So because we have this big privacy thing where we can't and don't see inside it.
Right. Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
That's an important part of what we do. But yeah, look, if they were to access advice through an advisor, it might be that they get that access for free. It might be that they have to pay a little bit for it too, because some advisors will charge for ongoing access, completely fair, along with their charging model and whatever value that advisor's doing and the service that they're providing. That's completely fair. We set it up specifically so that advisors could do that if they wanted to.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I mean, some of my clients, after years of being in there now, I mean, the way they use the software is better than a great number of my advisors that use the software.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty intuitive, so I think a lot of people will get it right away. I guess the only other question I have off the back of just the software and how people can access it directly is there a list of advisors that you're publishing anywhere that do use Planalytics? Because I think that would be kind of interesting.
Yeah,
for
I know,
consumers to
right?
go there.
And look, not yet. We do have this concept that, and we're slowly working towards it, that at some point we might actually genuinely go B2C, straight to the consumer.
Right.
And
Yeah.
go, hey, here's this cool thing, and then have that ability to go, but you know what? You're going to put your data in, you're going to do some modeling, and you're going to get to that point, I need something more. And at that point, we'd go, well, here's a list of advisors that use it.
Yeah. I think it makes sense because
I think so. We want to do that. We want to do that.
There's a whole page for KiwiSaver where you can put in your details. You can see the graphs. It's amazing. But yeah, like if there was a button, hey, talk to a KiwiSaver advisor. Same thing with mortgages, insurance, investments. You could do that. And I think that the advantage there is that if people follow a similar process, you get continuity and you get predictability and you get a sense of knowing what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Not like McDonald's, you're still getting a different person, but if they're using a similar sort of platform where your data is constant and you actually understand it, I think that's quite powerful. It just removes a lot of the inconsistencies and a lot of the guesswork. That's what I've really benefited from it from anyways, is just getting way more articulate and accurate with my advice and being able to demonstrate using numbers, which thankfully back up what I was thinking most of the time. Yeah, most of the time. I just think it's amazing. So that's kind of why I wanted to get in front of you and just chew the fat. But also, I think at the moment, it's just really important for people listening and watching to reach out to financial advisors, whether it's your insurance advisor, your KiwiSaver advisor, your mortgage advisor, whether it's a certified financial planner or a GP, right? Like a general practitioner of financial advice.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. Just get some input because, like you say, it's just a one little thing that they could say different that makes all the difference, right?
Yeah, and look, sometimes people say, well, look, what even is it? I go, look, my first answer tends to be this little analogy. I say, look, with a navman, this is a navigational tool, right? And with a navman, you put in your destination and it tells you to go left and right, and you get to your destination. With this, you put in the information about your world and the things you expect are going to happen, and then if you don't like where that's showing you can end up, you can make different choices.
Course correct. Yeah.
You can course correct.
Set different waypoints.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's
so, I love it for that.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. Once again, thank you very much, Royden. I appreciate it.
It's been fun.
Cheers.
Cool.